In today's world, the justice system often means a courtroom, a fine, probation, or maybe a few years behind bars. Harsh, perhaps, but survivable. Yet compared to the punishments of the 16th century, our system feels almost merciful, even gentle. Back then, justice wasn't about correction, it was about fear. It was about turning crime into theater and punishment into a memory that no one could erase. The goal wasn't just to hurt the guilty, it was to terrify the innocent, to make sure the cries of one would echo in the ears of thousands. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time. That old saying doesn't apply here, because in the 16th century, time was rarely the sentence. Pain was. Torture was. Death wasn't quiet, it wasn't swift, and it wasn't private. It was public spectacle. It was performance. And it was designed to leave scars not only on the body, but on the minds of everyone who watched. The pillory and the power of shame. Imagine standing in the town square, surrounded by your neighbors, your family, your enemies, everyone you've ever known, while your head and hands are locked into the pillory. To modern eyes, it might look almost harmless, a wooden frame like a photo booth from hell. But in the 16th century, it was one of the most humiliating punishments imaginable. Once you were trapped, the real punishment began: the crowd. People hurled rotten vegetables, stones, dead animals, even human waste. There are accounts of hot coals being thrown, burning the flesh of prisoners who couldn't move to protect themselves. You were mocked, beaten, spit on. If you fainted, you stayed slumped in the wood until you woke. If you begged for mercy, the crowd only grew louder. Survival was common, but it was a different kind of death. Your reputation, your honor was gone. And in the 16th century, reputation was survival. Without it, you were ruined for life. Branding and the marks of crime. But shame alone wasn't always enough. Some crimes required scars that could never be hidden. Enter branding. Executioners pressed red-hot irons into skin, burning letters into flesh. In England, an F marked a forger, a T branded a thief. Imagine carrying that mark for life, every stranger's eyes drawn to the wound carved into your face. Without antibiotics, infection was common. The burn wasn't just agony in the moment. It could fester for weeks, killing slowly. Branding wasn't about second chances. It was about erasing your humanity and turning you into a walking warning. The breaking wheel. For greater crimes, humiliation and branding gave way to destruction. The breaking wheel, also called the Catherine wheel, was one of the most feared punishments of the century. Picture it. You are tied to a massive wagon wheel. Your arms and legs are stretched across the spokes. The executioner approaches with a heavy iron bar, and then, methodically, deliberately, he begins breaking bones, one by one. Arms, legs shattered in multiple places. Your body is threaded through the wheel like a grotesque sculpture. You're left exposed to the sun, the cold, the birds. Sometimes death came in hours. Sometimes it dragged on for days. Historical accounts describe men lingering for 3 days on the wheel, barely conscious, bodies mangled beyond recognition. Hanging, drawing, and quartering. But if there was one punishment that defined the era of English justice, it was hanging, drawing, and quartering, the ultimate penalty for treason. First came the humiliation of being dragged on a wooden sled through the streets, denied even the dignity of walking. Then came the hanging, but not long enough to kill. You dangled, convulsed, gasped on the edge of death, only to be cut down alive. Then the knife. Your abdomen was opened, intestines pulled out. Sometimes they were burned before your eyes while you were still breathing. Only when your suffering had satisfied the executioner would your head be struck off, your body hacked into 4 pieces and displayed across the kingdom. This wasn't just execution, it was a performance of agony, a ritual of fear, and it was the law. Burning at the stake was not merely punishment, it was purification. Reserved for heretics, witches, and enemies of the church, it turned death into theater. The condemned would chain to a wooden post surrounded by bundles of wood. Sometimes the flames were lit close for a quick death. Other times they were lit far away so the fire would crawl slowly, roasting victims alive inch by inch. Damp wood was often chosen deliberately, creating thick smoke that suffocated before flames consumed. Accounts describe children brought to watch, entire families cheering as human beings were turned into ash. The cold's brittle and ducking stool. Not every punishment killed, some silenced. The scold's brittle, a cage of iron placed over the head with a spiked plate shoved into the mouth, was inflicted on women accused of gossip or disobedience. Speaking meant stabbing yourself. Bells were often attached so all could hear your humiliation as you were paraded through the streets. The ducking stool was another favorite. Women accused of being scolds or witches were strapped to a chair fixed on a beam, then dunked repeatedly into rivers or ponds. Cold, muddy water filled their lungs as the crowd roared with laughter. If you drowned, you were innocent. If you floated, you were guilty and dragged out for more punishment. It was a game with rules you could never win. Torture devices, pain without death. The 16th century excelled at devices that inflicted pain without ending life. The boot was a frame of wood or metal clamped around the leg. Wooden wedges were hammered in, crushing bones slowly, each blow splintering flesh and marrow. The thumbscrew was smaller but no less cruel. Iron clamps tightened around fingers until nails tore, bones cracked, blood dripped. Confessions flowed quickly when every turn of the screw destroyed another joint. The iron chair was a throne of agony. Covered in sharp spikes, sometimes heated red-hot from beneath, it turned sitting still into unbearable torture. Victims were tied down, flesh pierced, blisters forming as metal scorched skin. Water torture filled the lungs and stomach until ribs strained against the skin. Funnels shoved down throats poured water relentlessly, causing convulsions, vomiting, suffocation. Then the process began again. And then came rat torture. A cage holding a rat was strapped to the prisoner's chest or stomach. The back was heated. The rat, desperate to escape, dug downward, gnawing into the prisoner's body. Death wasn't always the goal. Sometimes just the fear of the cage was enough to break the strongest prisoner. Boiling, sawing, and the wooden horse. In Tudor England under Henry VIII, poisoners were sometimes executed by boiling alive. A cauldron filled with water or oil was heated until bubbling. Victims were plunged in, screaming as their flesh blistered, sometimes lowered slowly to prolong the agony. Crowds cheered, children watched. It was entertainment. Sawing was even more grotesque. The condemned were hung upside down, legs apart. A large saw cut downward between them. Gravity kept blood rushing to the brain, ensuring they remained conscious as the blade split flesh and bone. In some cases, executioners stopped halfway, leaving the victim to die slowly, suspended in horror. The wooden horse, or cheval, looked simple but was devastating. A triangular beam sharpened to a razor edge. Prisoners were stripped and forced to straddle it. Their full weight pressed down, slicing into flesh. Weights were often tied to their feet to increase the pressure. Hours meant mutilation. Survival meant permanent damage. Beheadings and the garrote. Beheading was considered merciful, but mercy was relative. A skilled executioner with a sharp axe might end life instantly, but dull blades or trembling hands often meant multiple blows. In 1587, Mary Queen of Scots endured 3 strikes before her head was severed. When it was lifted, her wig slipped, revealing hair still attached to the scalp. The crowd gasped. Even mercy was nightmare. The Spanish garrote was quieter. A prisoner strapped to a chair, an iron collar tightened around the neck, a screw twisted until the throat collapsed or the spine snapped. Sometimes a spike was driven into the skull. Quick if merciful, slow if not. It remained in use for centuries. Mutilation and symbolic punishment. For lesser crimes, mutilation delivered the message. Thieves lost hands, adulterers lost ears or noses, blasphemers had tongues cut out or burned with irons. In some cases, lips were split or eyes gouged. Bodies became billboards of guilt, walking reminders that law could carve itself into flesh.